Hi, I'm Tiana Shoei. I'm a writer, entrepreneur, leader, and energy. This is my podcast, Ain't Quite Right. Join me as we laugh, learn, and live big. Hello, everyone. This is Tiana Shoei, and welcome to my podcast, Tiana Shoei Ain't Quite Right. So thank you so much for tuning in to episode 6. This is another topic that I'm actually really excited to start to tackle. Like the last topic on vision, I am going to break this into a 2-part series. So the next two episodes are going to be specifically about the topic of habits. Now, to be completely and totally honest and fair with you, there is no way, even in 2 parts, I'm going to be able to cover the broad array of information that is out there in habits. There are so many great books, and I could go down a list of the books and authors, and I won't do that for sake of time today. But let me reassure you that this is a broadly discussed, thought about, researched topic because it is so integral to who we are as human beings. So in this next 2-part series, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the topic of habits and just really hit a very small portion of the information that's out there on habits. Now we'll talk about habits in future episodes and fill in more information, and we'll talk about different books and specifically the takeaways from those books. The purpose of why I prepared this information and what I really hope for you to get out of it is to take just kind of a high-level overview of how important habits are, and then what small steps you can begin to take to improve your habits and therefore improve your overall life. So this is meant to be a very introductory explanation of habits and a very basic introduction into the topic of habits. So again, we'll get into more detail on more information on habits. We'll talk about the psychology and the science. There's a lot of science behind how habits work, and different books hit different aspects of this. So we'll definitely go into more detail in future episodes about habits. But for the sake of today's discussion, really just want to start off by making us aware of what habits are, how important they are. So we're going to start off today and we're just going to cover why habits matter and what habits really are. And then after we get through that, in the next episode, we're going to start talking about some basic practices that you can do to A, become aware of your habits, and then B, make sure that the habits that you're now aware of are A, moving you in the direction of your vision, and B, moving you in the direction of the healthiest version of yourself, right? So we really want to make sure that we've got the right habits in our life by either eliminating, and let me rephrase that. We're not going to try to eliminate any habits. We may change habits, but not eliminate habits. And I'll explain later why we don't really get rid of habits. We just alter habits, because really the way that our brains work is we're going to constantly be looking for the triggers for a habit and the rewards for habits. So sometimes what we have to do is, rather than, let's say, and I'm just going to pick an obvious bad habit, right? Let's say smoking, cigarettes is one of your obvious bad habits, and you want to get rid of that habit. It's actually not getting rid of it, but replacing the reward and the sensation that you get from smoking with something that's healthier is ultimately the goal. And when you learn about habits, you realize that that's really the successful way of introducing healthy habits, is to identify which habits aren't healthy and then replace them with healthier habits. But first, you got to even become aware of your habits, and that's half of the battle. And as I dove into this subject and I read a lot and learned a lot, it takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of practice to become aware of your habits and how to most effectively use them so that they move your life in the direction that you want. Now, before I get started into this, I just want to go back and touch on a little bit what we talked about in episodes 4 and 5. In episodes 4 and 5, if you have not listened to those, I talk about what vision is and why vision matters. The reason that I follow that up immediately with a 2-part series on habits is because once you recognize and identify truly what you want for your life, the next step then is to begin to take action on your vision. And action on your vision follows up and manifests itself in the form of your habits. So the way I was going to start this, or the way that I was going to go through this topic, was to explain why habits matter. And that dovetails so nicely with the vision recap that I was just giving, because I want to start with the quote that is in the why category, why habits matter, but it also helps explain why I dovetailed this right on the end of the Vision podcast. So the first reason why habits matter come from a quote from F.M. Alexander, and I love this quote, and it's really important to remember. You don't decide your future. You decide your habits, and your habits decide your future. So it's really important to understand that your habits move you in the direction that your life is going. You may not realize that, again, we are hyper evolved to have most of what we do enter into a habit loop in our brains. So you don't decide your future. You decide your habits, and your habits decide your future. That is why understanding your habits, paying attention to them, and then making sure you have habits that are moving you in the right direction is important. Now, the reason that I started with vision before habits is because in order to know which habits you want to reshape, mold, change, or reinforce, some of you have great habits and you want to keep those habits going. In order to know which habits should take precedent in your life, you have to know where you're going. And that's why I started with vision. So if you are just new and tuning into this podcast, thank you for joining us. But I strongly encourage you, before you listen to this podcast on habits, to go back and listen to episodes 4 and 5. And in episodes 4 and 5, I specifically discussed the topic of vision. So then you can take that information and now couple it with the power of habit. So on that note, to just kind of go back to the habit discussion, why habits matter. Habits matter because they ultimately decide your future. As I mentioned, we are hyper evolved to have our brains move things into habit loops as quickly as possible, and then leave the rest of our thinking, our rational brain, to learning and growing and problem solving. Anything else our brain is trying to put into a habit loop. And so we are far more creatures of habit than we realize. And that is a good and a bad thing. And it's a good thing when we have healthy habits established. It can be a bad thing when we have unhealthy habits established. So learning how to control that is super important. The other reason that habits are so important is what you value is reflected in how you spend your time, and a large part of how you spend your time is habitual. So if you don't believe that a lot of what you do is habitual, I just want you to stop and think for a minute. So we're going to stop for just a second, and we're going to ask ourselves some questions. I want you to think about this morning when you got up. What was your routine and why? So when you first wake up, what do? Do you hit your snooze? Do you pick up your phone? What is it that you do first thing when you wake up? And then after that, what is your routine in the morning? And I want you to think about how much of that you actually physically decide from moment to moment. Now, for parents out there, I would dare say that, especially if you have younger children, you have no routine. I shouldn't say no routine, but generally speaking, your routine is interrupted a little bit more than average. But for the most part, anybody who has, a very regimented life, or if you have a routine of some sort, most of what you're doing in that routine is habitual. You're just following a habit loop. And again, one of the habits that we've gotten ourselves into that we are very unaware of is how much we use our phones, for example, how much we watch TV, what kind of food we put in our mouth, whether we exercise or don't exercise, what time we go to bed. All of those things are generally stored in some sort of habit loop in our life, and we're unaware of it. How about that afternoon snack you always pick up, or that cup of coffee in the morning? All of those things are habits. And so even the habit of coming home maybe and turning on TV, or maybe the habit of sitting down and playing on your phone. We're going to talk in future episodes about the concept of values and why recognizing your values, understanding your values is so important, because your value system is your decision system. It's how you decide what to do from 1 minute to the next. And so how you spend your time is a direct reflection of your values. And some of us are keenly aware of our values, and a lot of us are unaware of how much our value system is dictating our lives. But the reason that this is important, again, is a large part of your habit loop then determines how you spend your time, which then determines what you value. And again, all of this then takes us down a path of what direction is your life headed in. And being aware of this is what will make sure that in 5 years from now, in 7 years from now, you look back and you thank yourself for taking steps in your life to move your life in the direction that aims towards what you would consider success or what you want for your future. Very few of us actually stop and take the time to think about what decisions you're making, what habits you have, what values you have, and how they're dictating your life going forward. So again, just to recap that point, the reason that the reason that habits matter is because they dictate how you spend your time. How you spend your time is your value system, and that also determines your future. And then the third reason, and again, I could go on a lot of different reasons why habits matter, but I'm just trying to keep this very high level for introduction's sake. The third reason is, if you are aware of how your habits are affecting you, then you can actually get the most out of your effort. I don't know about you guys, but I work really hard on a lot of different things. If you're talking about the yard work and I'm outside in physical labor, or if you're talking about the physical labor of mountain biking or the riding that I do, or the physical labor of the running and walking, or keeping my house clean, or the work that I do, every day, my day job, what I do with this podcast, all the things that I spend my time on, I want to be the best version of whatever they are. And because again, time is finite. Time is the one non-renewable resource that we have. You don't get any more time. I don't get any more time. Time is what it is. And so since it is such a precious resource in our lives, being aware of how much effort we're putting out and then what we're getting in return for that is really important. When this kind of goes along with one of the topics that we'll get into in future episodes, but it's something that I'm learning and have learned in a variety of different ways. But one of the easiest ways to articulate it comes from an author named McKeown, and he wrote a book called Essentialism. And what he talks about in the book of Essentialism is that what we need to be able to do is learn how to distinguish the essential few from the trivial many in our lives. In other words, we need to learn how to prioritize what really matters in our lives from all the other noise. And part of that is then understanding, okay, once you understand what the most important things in your life are, you want to make sure that whatever time you spend doing those, you get the most from it. And the reason that the reason that matters at all is, if you are aware of how your habits work, you can take those habits and you can make them work for you, so that way you get the best ROI on your time. And I know that sounds so mechanical and like you're trying to perhaps script your life more than you should, but it's really important to think. Let me say it another way. Let me say it this way. Willpower is finite. You only have so much willpower available to you every day, and it's recharged through sleeping, through good diet and exercise. And so and we've all been there before. We've all had decision fatigue, or we've all gotten to the end of the day and we're just done. Like we have no more willpower left. We have no more energy left. We're just done, right? We want to save our willpower. We want to save all of that for the real critical, the essential few in our lives, and then take everything else and put it into a habit loop, so that way our willpower is free for more important things in our lives. And I know that sounds really philosophical, but it's extremely practical in nature. And let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, you want to be more efficient with your finances. You want to make sure that, again, the future version of you thanks the version of you today for the work that you did to be financially secure. Okay. And it takes some discipline in it, and it takes a lot of intentionality to be very disciplined with your finances and make the most out of them. The reward is tremendous. And I've talked about it, and I've mentioned, people who can help take your finances and make them work for you, rather than feel like you're constantly battling this issue. So let's say that you want, your goal is to become more financially effective. Now, let's say you have right now a habit of spending probably $30 to $50 a week that you don't need to spend. Maybe it's coffee, you go to coffee shops, maybe it's just little things here or there that you pick up, and you identify this in your budget. If you create a habit of something like, for example, tracking every penny that you spend and becoming conscientious of your money, or of saying, you know what, rather than that $30 to $50 of waste in my budget every week, I'm going to give myself a $10 bill and that's all I'm going to get to spend. And then you can save all that other money that you've been wasting. That's just one example. Okay. I'm not giving financial advice. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. So you now have that $10 and your habit has gone from just swiping your card and incurring about $50 a week in mindless charges versus the $10 bill that you're going to stick in your pocket and that's going to get you through the week. That habit, by taking that and moving that into a habit, you take a lot less energy out of the process of reining in your spending. If you just say, okay, I need to stop spending, then what that does is every time you go to make a financial decision, you have to use willpower to decide, do I get this or do I not get this? I really want it, but do I need it? And you go back and forth rather than saying, you know, it's just not in my $10 for this week. So that's one way of showing you how by being intentional and creating habits, you can make your life easier. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is you can make your life easier. So I just want to recap the 3 reasons why habits matter. You don't decide your future. Your habits decide your future and you decide your habits. The reason that habits matter is because what you do either instinctually through habit loop, it is ultimately going to be what determines your future. And I don't know about you, but one of the things that I think is so funny is one of our biggest fears as human beings is being out of control. And yet very few of us take control of the things that we have control over in our lives. And one of the things you have control over are the habits in your life, the decisions you make, the responses you have to situations. You have a lot more control in your life than you think. And one of the things that you should be, very intentional about are your habits, so that way you can control as much as possible, right? The outcome and the destiny and the journey that you wanted to go on for your life. The other reason that paying attention to your habits matter is because it is a direct reflection of your value system. And then you can make the most of your time and energy by taking things and just making them habit rather than having to constantly be in a state of decision making and wearing out your willpower. So I want you to stop and think, and I mentioned this earlier, but we never really went too far down that road. I'm sorry, I get distracted easy. But I want you to stop and think. We talked a little bit about what your morning routine is. I want you to stop and think about, do you wear shoes in the house or not? What's your habit for brushing your teeth? What's your habit for feeding yourself? What are your habits? Most of us don't even think about it. How often do you spend on your phone? Have you ever actually looked at the time you spend on your phone? Most of us are you don't think about your habits. And so when we get into part 2, the first thing we have to do is bring awareness to your habits. And so I'm going to give you guys some tools and some different suggestions on how you can bring awareness to your habits. But right now, we're not going to get into that. I just want you to spend the time between now and the next podcast to really think about, what are your habits? What are you doing on a regular basis? Start to bring some general awareness to them. Now, before I wrap up this episode, I thought one of the ways to really reinforce this is for me to share my story. And I don't really talk about my story a lot, not because I don't want to, but primarily because I try to stick to to content, and very rarely is there time for me to go into this. But in this case scenario, I really think it's important because one of the things that has revolutionized my life, and I was kind of, to be honest with you, I was the blind squirrel that found the nut. I would like to tell you that I had intentionally created this habit, but I really was just lucky enough to happen to stumble upon it. But one of the things that really changed my life is my exercise habit. And as I thought about it the other day, and I was kind of planning my weekend, it's funny because if any of you are listening today and you know me well, you probably noticed I'm a little bit tireder today than I generally am in a podcast. And that is because it's a Sunday evening. And generally by Sunday evening, I have literally emptied the gas tank when it comes to my energy. And that is because I live in a absolutely incredibly beautiful part of the state. And there are all kinds of trails available very close to me. And I had the privilege of being able to spend a Saturday morning out on the trails with one of my dearest friends. And we covered about 10 miles, which isn't a super long hike for me, but it's a good bit of climbing, about 2,300 feet of climbing in that 10 miles, and saw just amazing waterfall after amazing waterfall. We saw 3 species of salamanders. This particular trail that I'm on is just absolutely, or was absolutely just one of the most beautiful trails. So I wore myself out a little bit yesterday. And then today, my husband and I had the privilege of being able to take some salsa cutthroats out and do a gravel ride at DuPont in North Carolina. So we do a lot of riding at DuPont State Forest up in North Carolina. Then we came home and worked on our trail. So I mentioned it in my first podcast, but we own 10 acres. And we have a pine forest that we're growing. And then in between the pine trees, we've got single track trail that we're cutting. And so I'm exhausted between lobbing shears and mountain bikes, or well, a gravel bike, I guess is a better term for it, and 10 miles of hiking. I've worn myself out good this weekend, but that's how I structure most of my weekends. And it's not even a thought for me that I'm going to do some sort of fun outside adventure exercise. It's just not even a thought anymore. And it takes no willpower for me to decide what to go do for exercise, because this has been ingrained. This has been a habit loop ingrained in my life for such a long period of time. And I started off slow. And so that's what's really important to understand when we talk about habits is I'm very specifically, when we start talking about changing some of the habits and adding things in that are healthier than some of the things you may have, it's going to be a very slow process. If you try to change too much too soon, you end up finding yourself frustrated, and most people quit and walk away. That's why diet fads are such a thing, because you change too much too quickly and you're just not wired for that. It takes about 66 days. It depends on what book you read, but the most common amount of time that I see in books is about 66 days to truly change a habit in your life. So you don't want to change more than one habit at a time, and you don't want to make too many dramatic changes too quickly. So as I was planning out this weekend, and I was laughing to myself at how natural it is for me to think about what I'm going to go do to exercise, I realized that this habit was something that I built over a long period of time, and I started off really slowly. So I want to tell you my story. I found myself in my mid-20s. I was very overweight for my size. So I'm a tiny little thing. When I say tiny, I'm talking about height. I'm only 5'1". So let's just be honest. I am not competing for height in any category except for maybe the 3rd grade class. So I'm a short person. And I had taken a job where I was very sedentary. And so I was gaining a lot of weight. I was not eating healthy food. I was probably between 30 and 40 pounds overweight. And literally exercise was nowhere on the horizon for me. Thankfully, the company that I was working for we had like an extra building that was separate from our main office building, and they started hiring personal trainers to come in. And one day a week I went to a class. I still remember that very first class that I went to. I could not walk for like 3 days after that because it had been so long since I'd exercised. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to go to this one class a week for 1 hour. And from there, what that inspired me to do was learn to take the stairs rather than the elevator, and learn to park my car a little bit further and walk. And so I started building the habit of exercise really on a very small scale, 1 hour a week. And then from there, we had different types of instructors that came in. I tried everything from just regular weightlifting. We did some kickboxing. I took a ton of yoga, and I found a passion for running. And that passion ultimately, I'm trying to remember when I ran my first 5K. It probably would have been somewhere around 2006, 2007 from there. And then in 2013, I ran my first ultra marathon. Never in a million years when I first went and ran, the first mile, which was a walk run rotation that I did using Gallagher's method, where you walk for 30 seconds, run for 30 seconds. I mean, that's how I did it. I did loops around the parking lot of the apartment complex that I lived in to just start the habit of learning to exercise. Now, years later, like I said, it takes zero willpower for me to exercise. It is such an ingrained habit in my life that every day in some capacity, be it just a walk, or if I do a yoga routine, or if I run, or if I ride my bike, I exercise every single day because I created that habit of exercise years ago. So I want to encourage you and remind you that as we talk about habits and all of these things, it's a lot easier than you think, because we're going to start small and we're going to work our way into it in small baby steps. But we're first going to become aware of what we do every day, how we spend our time. So for this week, or I should say 2 weeks between now and the next podcast, the best thing that you can begin doing is paying attention to how you're spending your time, paying attention to what you're doing, because we're going to have some different tools and different exercises and different things that I'm going to give you as suggestions in the next podcast as to how then you can begin to shape your habits towards the future that you want. And the reason that I'm so fortunate, when I said I was a blind squirrel that found a nut, the reason that I was so fortunate to find the habit of exercise is because the best version of your life means the best version of you shows up for your life every day. And the best version of you is a healthy version of you. And health is not just physical, it is also emotional, spiritual. There's a lot of aspects of being healthy. You have to, you can have the healthiest body alive, but if you have unhealthy thought process or unhealthy emotional things, then you're only still halfway healthy. But a healthy body is one of the first steps. And one of the things that having a healthy body helps with is it also can help with some of the other health, having healthy emotions. I can tell you what, getting out there this Saturday with my friend Lester on the trails, it was good for my soul. At one point I looked at Lester and I said, Lester, this is like good for my soul. And it's true. When you begin to shape your life in the direction that you want, then the things that you do that normally seem like work actually become soul quenching, things that you get to enjoy. I love the things that I do for exercise. Exercise is not, like I said, it takes zero willpower. It's not something that I have to fight against because I've made it something pleasurable and enjoyable, and I maximize the time that I put into it. So thank you for tuning in to part 1 on habits. Again, just think about your habits a little bit. Think about what you do without thinking about it. And then in the next episode, we'll talk about how you can take those things and you can mold them in the direction that you want. So again, just to close and remind you why this topic is so important. You don't decide your future. You decide your habits, and your habits decide your future. So I really hope that you guys, again, I say this all the time, I really genuinely believe you are a unique, special person. Nobody else on the planet thinks like you. Nobody else has your taste. Nobody else is you. And so it's so important for you to connect with yourself, find out who you are, why you matter, what your purpose is. And I cover all these topics, and we're going to talk about this a lot in future episodes. And the first thing is making sure that the time you spend doing things is on the things that matter, and that you're getting the most out of those. Because if we can take a lot of these things that are important in your life and we can make them habits, then your life, again, the best version of your life begins to show up. So I've made habits of everything in my life, from my morning routine to my evening routine to how I spend my time during the day to the exercise. And by stacking these habits, then that leaves all of my willpower and all of the thinking to things that are really more important. And I don't have to spend energy on less important things in my life. I have a higher ROI in my life because I've been really intentional about these things. So thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you join me again for episode 7, where we close up this. And then for episode 8, I actually have my first guest. Now, Jack has joined me as a co-host. And so hopefully he'll be able to join me again. Right now, he's off celebrating with his wife, who recently just was able to immigrate to the United States. So we're super excited to have Carolina on this side of the ocean with us. And I know Jack is very happy to be back with his wife after months of being apart. So I'm really proud to see that those two are together. But this is actually a guest. I have a fun guest that I invited to my first episode. And it's a very apropos topic to come right on the tail end of habits. So imagine that. I have this already planned out. But again, thank you guys for tuning in. If you like this content, please be sure to tell your friends and family about it. Leave a review, subscribe. For additional content, you can find my blog and resources where I keep a list of podcasts that I like and books that I recommend, and the different things like the meditation practices that I recommend, all on my website at tianashoey.com. Otherwise, again, thank you so much for tuning in. And this has been Tiana Shoey. Until next time. Thank you for tuning in. For additional content, including my blog and social media, see my website, tianashoey.com. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe, leave a review, and be sure to tell your friends and family, anyone else that you think might enjoy joining us on this journey. Until next time.